going to be entitled A Critique on the Term Objectification. Now, in the status quo, the feminist social narrative posits that it should be considered morally reprehensible for men to so-called objectify women sexually. That is to say, in a very vague sense, and unfortunately I don't have the necessary time to go into all of this, that for men to basically have sexual attraction towards women and to be open about the ways in which they evaluate female appearance, be it in terms of just natural physical appearance or the way that appearance is cultivated, whether given by nature or the way that, or cultivated by conformity to some social fashion trend or something, should be stringently repressed. And chiefly, the feminist narrative doesn't really deal much with whether or not women should be allowed by society, by social norm, by what is considered progressive and what is considered convention, to do the same towards men. It is mainly a one-sided ideology, and as I will be establishing, the reason for this one-sidedness is nothing short of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy in the sense that it is a power attitude which chiefly has the aim of putting men in a one-down position, as is the case with arguably all contemporary feminism. Now, the first issue of objectification is this notion of realism. If, say, my opponents are feminists, would say, you know, I'd totally date that guy if only he shaved his beard, or if only he cultivated himself better. That establishes a double standard. That suggests that the woman feels that it's perfectly okay for a woman to objectify a man, and to not only have that objectification, but to be open about that objectification, open to her peers, maybe not to the man himself, though we'll get in a moment about how this is distinct from the kind of forced silence that men are being put into. And they're basically arguing, well, we can actually evaluate this man's value as a potential sexual partner or even romantic partner based on something as superficial as appearance. Now, obviously, if I had to believe that on the say-so of someone, if I had to believe that because society dictated it, and not necessarily someone individually whom I'm in a relationship with, whom I'm in a conversation with, but because the mass says so, then obviously I'd be very insecure to allow that objectification to become a self-objectification. In the same way, I think that if a woman is catcalled on the streets by a man, if she's very insecure, she will integrate that objectification and make it a self-objectification. But if she's very secure and she identifies herself not as an object in the view of society, narcissistically, but as a subject, then it should be no issue. By the same token, as it wouldn't necessarily be an issue to me if I heard someone telling me, you know, you'd get a lot of girls if you cut your beard, because I'd find that to be totally ridiculous. What kind of person would judge according to such a superficial standard? Now, of course, the argument is that if men do objectify women and do judge by features which are attractive, which are deemed socially attractive, then it's obviously actually hypocritical of the man to insist that women should not be so superficial, and it's patriarchal on the man's behalf. This is not necessarily true, first of all, because it doesn't meet the standards of what hypocrisy actually is. Hypocrisy does not mean contradiction. It doesn't mean that if one looks carefully enough at the situation and does enough research, one will understand why this contradiction is in place. Hypocrisy means when you are pushing for an outward ideological standpoint which inwardly in your private life you don't live up to. And as I have demonstrated, this is actually what the feminists do. The feminists outwardly insist that women should not be objectified, yet they also argue that their standard is that of equality. So theoretically, therefore, the society they're trying to establish is one in which men don't objectify women either. The problem with this is that they define objectification entirely in terms of a judgment based on the individual psyche of the man, however, a judgment which is unwarranted because they don't really have access to the individual psyche of the man, they only have male sexual behavior. So what they're actually arguing for is, from a large scale sociological view, sexual repression. But the problem goes deeper. The problem goes into the relationship of power between men and women, actually between women and men, I should say, because of what is called sexual power. And that concerns the issue of the fact that being objectified can actually be an exceptionally good thing. The current argument is that women are a victim group because objectification and sexual attention happens to them more so than it does to men, and they would prefer to be regarded more for their intellects than their bodies in many circumstances. But the obverse can be true for both men and women. It can be frustrating and I know from experience, to be constantly praised for one's intellect, but to always be overlooked as a sexual object. Now, there is a solvency to this, and that is actually through men taking back what is called their sexual power and creating a stable ground between both parties. Because and this is where the situation is not one of hypocrisy, but one of trying to solve the problem. There is a contradiction to it, but it is a way of trying to arrive at this ideal state which equality would seem to imply. That is to say, if I can objectify you, you're not obligated to objectify yourself. Then in turn, you may objectify me and tell me, look, I date you, but you have to change your beard. And I can choose, again, whether to objectify myself and conform to that standard or not. And that allows us to have an open society, a free society, where we can be open with each other about our sexual preferences, and that way I'll know for certain whether or not I'm actually as superficial as everyone else says, and to which degree I actually value the whole sexual game and the romantic game in general. But I don't have to appeal to the shady authority of what society itself says, because women aren't being open about how they're objectifying men, usually. But in that circumstance, and it's true, I'm drawing a distinction here, there's a distinction intrinsic to the feminist narrative. In that circumstance, women are actually being hypocrites because they're saying outwardly that objectification is bad, but the objectification that they're perpetuating is inward, and mainly they're sharing it in their own social group. However, while men also have an inward sense of objectifying women, they still do it, and they still do it among themselves, they're being pushed by the narrative to do it, and that's why I'm saying, look, what we have to do is push back and say, no, I refuse. I'll catcall someone if I think that it will teach me something about myself as a sexual being, and it can actually allow me to live a more healthy life, and allow other people potentially to live a more healthy life, morally, sexually, socially, etc. And this solves the problem of the hypocritical power attitude, which is evidenced by the fact that women pretend to be a victim group by something that actually an advantage that men would like to have. And there is an argument to be said that, you might think it would be good for you to have this kind of sexual power, but trust me, you don't want it. But I should say that the victim mentality is never a justification for either hypocrisy, or a double standard, or for stifling social change. If you choose to be a victim, if you choose to self-identify that way, like I said, in the same way as choosing to self-objectify, that is your own choice. If you want to live in a free society, however, if you don't insist on conforming to the social narrative, as Simone de Beauvoir, the French feminist, would say it, then you have to basically allow yourself to be objectified by others, yet you don't need necessarily to objectify yourself and to conform to their standards of beauty. And that would actually have an honest society which has what we lack nowadays, despite the information age, and that is actual transparency and actual interest in being totally open with the world about who you are, as painful as it may be, to confront that and to confront human nature. I'm drawing this also, of course, on the theory of objectification developed by the Marxist existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, who dated Simone de Beauvoir over the course of their entire careers in one of the earliest open relationships to have existed in Europe. And what the main point here is that there is a solvency to this. If men take back their sexual power, there will be a balance of power between men and women. And men don't have to rely on the authority of women telling them about how terrible it is to always be regarded as a sexual object, because they'll have had a chance to know what that power feels like themselves and know whether it's really a position of disadvantage or if it's actually a position of privilege. Let's look at the history of fascism. Fascism in Germany arose out of the presupposition that Jews actually ran the world. And that is actually something that a number of white people in America are being threatened with today. I can speak on both behalves. Fascism now, I'd say, manifests in more devious ways, not necessarily more deviant ones, but look at the state of Israel. The Zionist movement, which was based on the Jews adopting the victim mentality, was actually what led to what we would call an outright genocide in Palestine, and the cycle continues. If we want an open society and we truly value equality, that means that either no one should be allowed to objectify anyone, or everyone should be. But ultimately, the affirmative answer is the best answer. Because look, you might argue that we could live in a society where we all basically objectify ourselves and try to conform to some social narrative, but we can't objectify each other openly, outwardly. But then who determines that narrative? Who determines what is attractive? Some government? Some Maoist dictatorship? Some Platonic philosopher king? No. This will be the society develops this way. Human beings develop self-consciousness through interaction and through basically seeing themselves in the eyes of others and choosing whether they choose to agree with how others see them or not. And that is a freedom, and that is a responsibility. The price of freedom is always responsibility, and the price of responsibility is always acknowledging one's intrinsic freedom. So the feminist narrative proves itself to be hypocritical because women who are actually in a position of privilege which men don't usually have, but grow tired of having this position of privilege because they don't necessarily all enjoy the responsibility of it. They insist on creating a double standard where basically men are led to believe, these are the impacts, men are led to believe that they are actually, that they are actually at fault just for being attracted to women in the way that they're attracted to them. And because they can't be open with people, because they're actually forced into a condition of hypocrisy, unless they take action against it, as I'm suggesting that they should, in the alternative, because of this, they also become very naive. They don't realize the degree to which they're being essentialized. And some of them, when they think they become disillusioned and they shave off all their hair, find that doesn't change the situation either. Because some women are of course very superficial, others are not. Some men are very superficial, others are not. But who cares? Why do we need an ideology that enforces people to be decent? Why don't we actually throw off the masks and be honest about how sexual power really works? Sure, there are some women out there who are attractive because they deliberately cultivate an attractive appearance. There are other women who aren't trying to look that way. The feminist narrative suggests that you should always presume upon only half of the situation being true. Or otherwise what they would suggest is, well, yeah, these women are trying to look attractive, but you shouldn't allow them to be successful. No. The thing is, when you take that leap of faith and you reach out to a person that you're attracted to, which has been condemned systematically as catcalling and all these things, then what you're actually allowing is the possibility to learn about that person, whether that person chooses to be objectified or not. But that person shouldn't feel entitled to saying you should know better, because there are women out there who do try to cultivate appearance and who also objectify as well. I think that pretty much covers the geist of it.